Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Mindset plays an important role for the sales community because sales in itself it's an emotional sport. It's the ability to transfer and relay emotion. And because it's an emotional sport, I think a lot of salesmen overlook how important mindset is to their day-to-day function.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Nicart. I'm actually a sales manager, producing sales manager, and I'm fortunate enough to lead the #1 team on a national size, multi-billion-dollar lending institution company that deals all across the US. And I also am a huge sales enthusiast. I am passionate about sales, mindset development, negotiation techniques, and developing a new way of selling.
On today's episode with Daniel, we're diving into mindset, and not the usual conversation that we've had about mindset in the past. We're diving into how we can systematically improve it, how we can put processes in place to improve our mindset and raise our standards every single day. And so, with that said, let's jump right into the conversation. Should we be looking to improve, change our mindset, upgrade, expand what we believe that we can and can't do? Is this something that we do once, or is this something that we do need to do over and over and over as our careers develop?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think that mindset plays an important role for the sales community because sales in itself it's an emotional sport. It's the ability to transfer and relay emotion. And because it's an emotional sport, I think a lot of salesmen have this kind of misconception of how the proper or I should say, overlook how important mindset is to their day-to-day function. Being in a sport like sales, I've noticed, or at least I've learned over the last 20 years, is that because it's such a high contact sport, you're facing a lot of rejection, you're facing a lot of resistance. You continuously have to grow and adapt to current times. And the only really way to really push past and motivate yourself is through having the right mindset techniques in place. And so mindset is just an ongoing, I would say, an ongoing topic for the everyday salesman that wants to reach the next level, because without a strong mindset, you're simply just going to give up. You're going to remain stagnant, or you're never really going to reach your full potential. And so at least in my opinion, I personally, every single day, I'm still a producing sales manager, and I run a team of about 15 sales representatives. And what I know is true is that those that I see with the strongest mindset pieces in place, or mindset practices in place, like morning rituals, exercising, meditation, self-development, audiobooks, reading books, I've noticed that they stand out from the rest, as opposed to compared to individuals who kind of have this stagnant mindset. And stagnant mindset, what I'm talking about, are just individuals who kind of accept things the way they are. They don't necessarily take the approach of being creative, stepping out of their comfort zone and challenging kind of the norm, where they look at a particular platform or foundation, let's just say a sales floor or a sales process that is put in place from an organization or a business, and they kind of accept it as it is rather than think outside the box. They'll look at kind of the problems as opposed to find solutions. Now, if you look at the crowd who has the mindset practices in place, and these are individuals that do everything from, have morning rituals. They wake up a couple hours early. They invest time every single day in watching great content like your channel, my channel. And they really invest in themselves, not only invest into training courses, but they invest into, content and mastermind groups and mentors and coaching. And what I've noticed from them is that they constantly challenge themselves. So they're always stepping outside of the comfort zone. They're willing to take the risk. They're willing to put themselves out there, understanding that defeat, rejection, and resistance is actually a good thing. Whereas the stagnant mindset typically looks at these things that like, the rejection, the hard work, the hours, the sacrifice, they look at it as, well, I shouldn't have to do that. I belong with a strong organization. We have a strong brand. You should give me the best leads, the lay down leads. And there's that misconception where I think the newer age, or even sometimes veterans and seasoned salespeople, will be kind of stuck in their ways. And today in 2019, it just simply doesn't work anymore. You have to be versatile. you have to understand not only the end result that you're trying to deliver your prospect or the organization that you're trying to fulfill an order or fulfill or create a relationship with, but you have to really be more empathetic. Whereas the days of Glenn Ross, Boiler Room, right, all those old sales movies, those tactics, the shark tactics, it's actually pushing more people away. So there's a good way to be aggressive and there's a bad way to be aggressive. But I think it all comes down to mindset development. And by putting a system in place and creating the right actions right from when you wake up, I'm talking about the smallest detail, from challenging yourself to not hit snooze, challenging yourself to get up, go out to the gym, even though it's raining or even though it's cold. It's those little small wins that will help you develop a strong mindset by the time you get into your place of business, or before you get into your origination or your prospecting calls. You'll be a little bit more primed and conditioned to win, because you've taken so much time and so many steps to improve the one thing that matters most, and that is your mindset.
So let me pose this to you, because it'll give some context for the audience. Clearly, you've got a team underneath you. Say you're hiring a new individual, and two people come in. They're equally qualified. One person has a strong mindset for right now. They're perhaps doing everything right, but they have no ritual or routine, or have minimum. And then another person is perhaps trying to work on themselves. They're trying to develop themselves, but they do have the habit and I think you used the word practices in place to improve themselves. Which one would be the person that you'd, all else considered equal, which one would you most likely want to hire?
I think that, which is funny because I've seen this time and time again. I think that there are some people who are just kind of naturally gifted. They're very extroverted. And so they're naturally just good. Like, there's some people that are just naturally good at sports. And I think the same thing applies with communication. There are people who are naturally good at communication. But what I've noticed is that even though you could be good at something, if you don't have the right mindset, if you don't have the right influence or motivation, you're simply just going to kind of do subpar production. So you're going to be okay with subpar results. You're going to be okay with being in the middle. Whereas I noticed that even if you're not as skilled, if you have the right mindset, you are always constantly pushing yourself to raise above the average. And so even if you are, let's say, a beginner, or you're going into an industry or selling a particular product that you've never sold before, one thing rings true is that your mindset and influences your actions. Because I think the window to your mindset is your eyes, right? And the reason for that is because your view, your perception of certain things is what feeds you and fuels your mindset. So if you see things as a challenge, you can operate in two ways. You can operate and say, okay, I see this as a challenge I'm going to figure out. Or you can look at it as, oh, this is too difficult. I don't want to figure this out. Show me an easier path. And so to answer your question, if I had a choice between the two, I would actually go with the one who was less skilled, but had the right mindset to learn, because typically those who are more skilled has the experience enough to where they either bring in bad habits from their past experience. And if they're not willing to challenge their growth or fuel their mind, then I think that they're kind of just going to be stuck in their ways. You're not necessarily going to push them. They'll be very independent, which will be great for a leader, because you kind of want your team to be automated and kind of self-efficient. But what you're not going to find is someone who's going to push themselves to get to that next level. Even though they're great at their job, they're still the one who kind of just does just enough. Whereas even the smaller one, let's say the alternative option of the sales agent, who may not necessarily say the right words, right? But they're brave, because their mindset fuels that hunger to put themselves out there. So even though they're tripping, they're falling, they're scraping and bruising themselves, you see growth. And I know that at one point they will eventually become better, and that person will actually become more successful than the more skilled person without the right mindset actions in place.
How healthy is it for because, and I saw from this, and if it's healthy, I'll share my thoughts on it. If it's not healthy, I'll attempt to stop doing it. But how healthy is it for us in sales business, whatever it is, to have a bit of a chip on our shoulder? So what I mean by that is, I am not particularly, maybe I'm gifted at some things, but I'm not particularly gifted at sales. I have to work hard at it, and I have to constantly try and almost reinvent my mindset, which we'll come on to in a second, and reinvent myself for the sale, for the deal size, for the environment. I have to do this. I don't just have the gift of the gab. I can't just walk into a room and build rapport with people quickly. So I've got a bit of a chip on my shoulder. Every time someone says something that's negative about me, I go, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that drives me. So I see it financially as a positive thing. But almost in the world we live in, you've got these two binary balls of, you got some people who go, yep, drill down on that. That's really powerful. And you've got another side of people who go, oh no, we should sit and meditate and sit on a rock in the desert for 6 months and not speak and get rid of all that. That's ego. We don't need ego. Clearly the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But is it healthy? And do people with a chip on their shoulder end up having more success than individuals who just kind of plod along without this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think me personally, speaking from my experience and kind of seeing it both ways, I've met a lot of successful sales representatives who don't necessarily have a chip on their shoulder. They just genuinely like helping people. And so they'll actually attract success to themselves and they won't even know it. They're just natural. And I myself coming up, I favored having kind of that resistance and that doubt. So I operate well with a chip on my shoulder, and I actually need it. I'm kind of addicted to it. And the reason for that is because I like when something is doubted upon me. So for example, I have a channel on YouTube and Facebook, and you have a channel, of course, right? So sometimes you'll see comments from, the audience that will critique your work.
I think you're being very polite though with that word.
Yeah. They'll go out of their way and just say some comments that are kind of off the wall. And at the end of the day, you could look at it and fold and just say, okay, fine, this just isn't for me. But I look at it as a challenge, and I say, and I'll actually look at it for what it's worth instead of looking at it as hey, they're talking about me because that individual simply does not know me. And so I think that when we come up, especially in this day and age, we're always going to face this resistance. At some point, we're always going to face doubt, not only from our colleagues, but even sometimes from our family and from our closest friends. And the way that we operate, I think, is going to be based individually, like it's going to be based, case by case per person. But in my opinion, I think having a chip on your shoulder is necessary, because when you have a chip on your shoulder in a good way, because you could have a chip on your shoulder in a bad way and think you just be this real narcissist and think that everyone's talking about you, everyone's against you, and kind of it will come out in your tonality and your body language that you're on defense all the time. But if you know how to balance it, where you have a chip on your shoulder in a sense that you want to prove to everyone else, including yourself, that you are more than capable and more than worthy and more than entitled for the same fortunes and success as every other person, because every other person's just like you. They're just a person. And if they could figure it out and they could push themselves and reach levels and heights that you aspire to reach, you can too. And so if you can balance it out where you use that chip on your shoulder as motivation, as fuel, as fire, then also balance yourself so that you're not necessarily coming out too aggressive to where you're being, cocky, or you're being rude, or you're being offensive, and you find that fine line, then I think it could be very, very powerful. I think it's something that we personally will look at for those that operate well with the chip on their shoulder. We look at it from a state of defense, but also a state of offense. So it's that fine balance. So you have to be defensive for your dreams, your goals, your aspirations. I'm defensive for mine. For example, I do everything that I can and protect my family. My children, the experiences that they have in their life, the experiences that I have in my life. And I won't necessarily settle, but at the end of the day, I'm humble enough to know where I came from. And I'm very appreciative. So I'm not necessarily going out there like I'm entitled. I'm going out there like I deserve it, and I'm going to get it.
I like this offense versus defense, because the way I think about this, because this could be taken in out of context perhaps. When I say I've got a chip on my shoulder, it makes me want to, I don't know who said this, but it sticks in my mind of, I want to build the biggest building. I don't want to win by knocking down everyone else's. I want to win by being the best, even if it's 1% better than the competition. Clearly in sales, it's a zero-sum game most of the time. And so you're going to win from that side. So I'm not looking at ruining other people, especially in, I don't know, the podcast space. I could probably say some choice words about a few other people in the space, and it would affect them. I don't want to do that. I want to win by having the best podcast, the biggest audience, all that kind of stuff. Something that you kind of goes on this offense and defense side of things, and this might be a better way of posing it, might be, do we need feedback loops? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a chip on your shoulder. It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to beat other people, but do we need to engineer feedback loops into our sales activities and our mindsets so that we say, we got to this point, now we need to kind of take it up a level and up a level and up a level, kind of for forever and onwards? Are feedback loops perhaps a better way of describing the chip on the shoulder?
Oh yeah. Now I understand. So I think having feedback loops, like kind of the reassertiveness, where you're kind of always looking how far you've come, right? But at the same time, not letting that be the determination of whether or not you keep going. So for example, I think all salesmen will relate is that any sales organization has a sales floor and a sales team. Sales keeps businesses afloat. They keep businesses alive. And so inside this sales organization, you have kind of this economy. It's like this it's this city within a business. And so if you really think about it, every successful sales company gives KPIs, the key performance indicators. And so they determine your success based on small actions that lead up to the final result. And that result typically is a sale, it's a fostered relationship, it's a new account, whatever it may be. And wherever you fall within this sales organization, whether you're at the bottom 30%, you're in the mid mark, or you're in the top 10% of your sales organization, you're constantly reminded of where you are. And I think that's why sales is such a competitive sport, is because it always reminds you that, you're only as good as what you bring to the table today, right? And so with your question of having kind of a chip on your shoulder, or kind of having that fuel and motivation, I think what separates the successful versus the average are those that look at that chart, and wherever they are, they're actually studying the top. And so they're studying the top because that's where they want to go. Whereas the alternative, the average sales agent, is more or less trying to find out how to just stay under the radar. So they're okay with being in the middle as long as they don't necessarily go to the bottom half. And what I've found, or at least what I've learned as well as experienced myself, is that any organization I've ever worked for, I've always studied the top 10 or the top echelon of that sales floor, because I wanted to watch them from afar. I wanted to soak up kind of their actions and their practices so that I knew exactly what it takes to become that one of the top 10. Whereas what I've noticed from my fellow colleagues and individuals that I work side by side with, they will look at that top 10 with the chip on the shoulder, but in a bad way. So they'll look at them and say, oh, they probably get the better leads because they're the manager's favorite, or they probably get, the Glengarry leads because they've been here longer or they're seasoned. And I just can't never get that because my manager doesn't like me. And so they'll look for external excuses as to why they can't climb, and they'll fold even though they have that chip on the shoulder, kind of that saying, it's in a bad way. So they'll actually hold themselves down as opposed to use the saying of chip on the shoulder as a good metaphor to push themselves and figure out how to climb to that top 10 and join the rest.
How much of this, and I never even thought about this before, but hopefully this makes some sense to yourself, Daniel, and the audience. How much of this comes down to our standards? Because, for context, I've always been the middle of the pack person. I've always been, well, I want to do enough that I don't get sacked. I don't really care about, if I'm earning $100,000 a year in this medical device sales role, I'm having a nice little life. I'm 25, 26, earning that money, got me company BMW, got me, awesome girlfriend, and we're going out partying and whatever. I'm happy. And that's the standard that I'd set for myself, right? But I feel, as you're saying this, if for whatever reason, inadvertently or not, I ended up in the top 5% or 10%, then I'd be going, shit, I don't want to drop out of this. So I'm going to now compete with these guys and girls rather than compete with the people in the middle of the pack and essentially just staying 5%, 6%, 10% over target, more so than the people at the other end who are getting cut every year. So how much of this comes down to the standards where we are sat? And is this malleable, or is this kind of hardwired into our brains?
That's a great question. I think that because it's so common to see a sales representative kind of remain in the average role, or just kind of in that mid mark. They're under the radar. They're not necessarily at the bottom half, but they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily have the spotlight. So they may not be getting all the acknowledgement and the rewards, but at the end of the day, they do just enough to keep their seat, because sales is that kind of dog eat dog sport, right? So if you're not producing results, unfortunately, you get let go. And typically those sales agents will be going from company to company to company to company, and there's really no security left. And so I think that it is important to of course find happiness. So wherever you are, whether it's in the middle, the top, whatever makes you happy. Is that an
excuse though? Is that bullshit to be, I'm happy here? Or is that an okay thing to say, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think I believe it's okay. Just because that's that particular individual's way of thinking. That's their particular mindset. And I think that's where, mindsets kind of differ, where if they're settled and they're okay, they're just getting by, then I think it's going to be up to that particular person to push themselves and want more. Right. Where some people are going to look at sales in different ways. I think it really comes down to two ways. It comes down to, one, I can make a ton of money, or I can make more than if I worked some just 9-to-5 job, because there's bonuses, there's incentives, there's commission schedules, right? Whereas other individuals will look at it and say, wow, I literally have no ceiling. I can make as much as I desire. All I have to do is really master this process, and they'll look at financial freedom as more of the upside. Whereas being financially independent is a different thing, right? Like, okay, I'm paying my bills. I got a nice car. I've got a nice girl. My life is good. I guess I'll just go ahead and coast, as opposed to looking at it like a top producer who's looking at it 3, 5, 10 years down the line and seeing the big picture. Whereas I think the average kind of mediocre sales agent is kind of just looking at it for the day. They make their goals for the month, and they live on the month-to-month basis.
Because I'm asking this kind of personally, I'm getting coached here as well. So we're a few months away from relaunching our sales school kind of platform. There's loads of new cool stuff that's gone within that. I was showing it to she wouldn't probably appreciate me calling her a mentor, but she's basically been and done a lot of what I'm doing, but in a different, like a teaching platform, but in a different kind of vertical. And she's done very well for herself. Let's put it that way. Anyway, she was going, well, this, and this, and this is your marketing, your messaging is great, and you've got this, and hopefully, it's going to help all these people. And she goes, and what kind of revenue are you thinking that you're going to be able to generate, a year, 2 years from now? And I was very open and honest, and I give her a number, and she looked at me like I was an idiot. She looked at me like I was absolutely insane. And she goes, why is that number so low? And it's 5 times more than I ever made in sales, perhaps even more than that, kind of pondering on it for a second. It's, 3 times more than the company makes right now, which is still, doing well for kind of the little business that we are. And she was still like, how are your standards so low, when I'm thinking I'm shooting above and beyond what we've ever done in the past? And so then I was just like, well, why is it so low? And I couldn't quite, and she's awesome, but she couldn't quite put it in words. She couldn't quite explain it to me, other than just, you'll see over time as you smash it. She basically said, you're going to smash that goal within the kind of first 12 months, and then you need to have a rethink about it all. And it was, and clearly I'm not trying to humble brag here, because it doesn't exist. You might not make any money. It might be a total flop. But it was really interesting to me to have someone look at me just face to face going, why are your standards so low, when the revenue numbers that we're talking about are, again, at the top end of my kind of perception on things. So why is it that we have these numbers, and clearly it is malleable, because I'm talking about it, and she broke down my thought process and programming with this. So where do these numbers come from, perhaps, is the place to start, and then we can look at how we can systematically kind of break them down over time.
Yeah, it's a great question, and a real good way to segue into how important your environment and influences are, because I think that if you have a specific energy around you, like you're in essence limited. So I think without having the right mindset, technically your view is very limited, where it's not as expanded as those who are experienced and those who kind of have enough experience to know the potential. And so they see the opportunity and they grab it by the horns and they take it as far as they can. Whereas some entrepreneurs or some content creators or even just some salesmen for that matter will look at it as, okay, well, if I just do A, B, and C, then I should be able to get D, E, and F. It's very logical. It's very kind of systematic. Where I've seen, at least in my personal opinion, that if you kind of just go all out and you put yourself out there, you have fun, you begin to love the process. And it's very important that those who you surround yourself with are also somewhat on that same wavelength, because if you are surrounded by Debbie Downers or kind of mediocrity, then you're naturally going to adapt. It's human instinct to just adapt to our surroundings. And that plays a huge influence with our mindset. And so if we're let's say if we grew up in the middle class, we're not going to necessarily think that we're entitled to also live wealthy in a wealthier class. Where what's odd is that if you grew up in the lower class and maybe you came from a background of poverty, you emotionally feel the pain of being limited and being kind of restrained from having that sense of freedom. And so you initially desire to not feel that way. And the only reference that you have are those who don't feel that way, which are those who are typically wealthy. And so I think that's probably why most who come up in a kind of a middle class lifestyle remain middle class, is because that's all they know. Whereas if you come up from poverty, what's ironic is that you don't necessarily know the wealthy lifestyle, but you constantly think about it all day and every day. And because you're focused on that wealthy group, you see what they do and you kind of studying them from afar. You may not be knowing it, but you see the limitless amount of prosperity that they can really experience. And you ask yourself, well, why can't I do that too? But if you ask the middle class, like, hey, don't you want to live like the wealthy? They may not necessarily be encouraged to say, yeah, like blah, 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 because they never have really felt the pain of poverty. And so they're okay. They're getting by. And just as long as the bills are paid and the lights are on, it's okay, because that's all they know. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, we've never touched on this on the show in the past, and I think this is really interesting. So it's essentially not all of it, but there's a whole chunk of hip hop culture which is based around this, right? And then there's the alternative, and this clearly I'm not from the world of hip hop. I'm in the middle class or lower working class is what we call it here in the UK, kind of lower to middle working class of comfortable. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, most of them are met, right? There's a roof over me, a loving family, food on the table, all that kind of stuff. And interesting, as you're going through this, I was like, well, what would someone who's in the kind of not 1%, I think that's most achievable for most people, that's like kind of $300,000 a year, whatever it is. If you're in that kind of million, 2 million in revenue or kind of commissions, which I know a bunch of salespeople listening to the show are in that realm, which is incredibly exciting for everyone else who's listening, who's aspiring to be there. And there's people listening to this show right now alongside you who are your peers who are there. Well, they're in the realm of going, I'm going to get a new boat. Well, when they talk about boats with me, I immediately go, that sounds like a bit of a pain in the ass. You've got to maintain it. You've got to pay for this. And so my mindset immediately is cost of things versus their mindset, because they're earning so much revenue, commissions, bonuses, whatever you want to kind of frame it up as. It's a negligible cost. It's the same as me buying the new iPhone, right? It's all in proportion. So with all that said, Daniel, and we'll try and tie everything together with this, how do we systematically improve our mindset? What principles do we need to know? What daily routines do we have to put in place so that there's, and I used this word before, there's a process in place for all of this so that it happens, and all we've got to do is put one foot in front of the other each day, as opposed to have some kind of divine inspiration or some beam of light come down and hit us on the head and turn some of this on.
Sure. Yeah. You know what? That's a great question. So I think first off, self-awareness is key. It's very, very relevant. You need to know exactly where you want to go, and whether it's at a point of survival, contentment, happiness, or if you wanted to be filthy rich to where you can have the option to go and buy a boat if you want. I think that you hit on a good meaning, because what we've noticed from kind of that hip hop world or even athletic world is those that come from poverty, once they reach wealth, they spend it faster than they can earn it.
Yep.
And they end up burning the bridges, or they at least burn the boats, and they find themselves in this point of no return. And so if they get injured, or if they don't sell enough records, they can't afford that lifestyle, and then they disappear. And so I think that's a pretty dangerous, habit to have if you're living beyond your means. However, if you have enough self-awareness and you have good intent behind you, and you know that your primary goal is to set up a secure foundation for yourself and for those around you, I think that you will have better intentions when you're climbing to reach the levels that you're aspiring to reach. And so I think that the good practice is, number one, is really understand why you do what you do, because that in itself is going to help you when temptation tries to push you away. So temptation of, I'll just get to it later, or I'll hit it next month, or maybe this wasn't my year. And there's that voice of temptation that tells you it's okay, at least you tried, as opposed to, digging deep and remembering your true reason why. So if you peel back the layers of your why, it's more beyond the boat. It's more beyond, it goes beyond the idea of having the fanciest car. What you're trying to find is love. You're trying to find acceptance. You're trying to find, this sense of success, like you are independent. And I think that if you can really hone in on why you do what you do, and really nail down the emotional factor behind it, you'll naturally develop the right mindset in the proper way. Where I think there are athletes and there are, musicians out there who don't necessarily have the right mindset, but they're naturally talented. They could play an instrument, or they can play a sport very well. And so they're naturally going to make money, but without the right mindset, habits, and techniques, they're going to burn through that money, and they're going to kind of fizzle out. But if you look at, players like Kobe Bryant, or stars like, let's say Lady Gaga, and I'm saying that just because I saw the movie A Star Was Born the other day, you look at these particular influencers, they're just like us, and they're passionate about their job. They're passionate about their art because they love the process. So beyond money, even though they're in a position where they can buy anything and everything, they're still doing good by providing value to their audience. And so I think, to answer your question, when it comes down to the practices and the techniques that one must have, I think that self-development is crucial. You have to really you have to be very disciplined to consistently work on improving yourself. And that all really starts, in my opinion, with a morning routine. The reason why a morning routine is more favorable, in my opinion, is because that's the way you start your day. And so, for example, most sales agents will wake up and be in the office ready to work within about a 30 to 45 minute window. Whereas if you had a morning ritual, you're typically up at 4 a.m, 4:30, but you don't necessarily need to be in your place of business until about 8:30 or 9. But that first couple hours is designated to yourself. I live in a house filled with kids. I'm married and I have a family. So that first few hours is serenity to me, because it's all silent. It's dedicated to just me. I don't have noises. I don't have questions. I'm not. And here's one thing that's very important to understand, is that your morning ritual has nothing to do with work. So you don't wake up and put out fires. That's not part of a morning ritual. You don't wake up and answer every single email in your inbox, or check social media, compare yourself to others. You really dedicate that morning ritual to fine-tuning yourself, feeding your mind, feeding your body, feeding your brain. And I think that whether you choose to do it through exercise, you choose to do it through reading, meditation, whatever you do, it's just about you. And it's really a point of reflection. So you're thinking about not only how far you've come, but what needs to be done to take yourself to the next level where you aspire to reach, because it's human nature to want to grow. It's human nature to want to problem solve. And I found that if you wake up and check into work all within an hour of time, you never really give yourself any time to work on you. And so if you constantly live or operate within that cycle where you don't necessarily feed yourself, you're not putting any work or investing into yourself, you're just going to be part of this process that is going to deflate your mindset. It's going to ruin the way you see things. Like I said, your eyes, the way you see things, are window to your mindsets because of your perception of certain things. And when you have a couple hours to dedicate to yourself, you start to see things different. because you use these couple hours to work on yourself, to read, to study your art, and to watch influential channels, right? Like the Salesman Podcast or Sales Remastered. And you challenge yourself to look at things in a different way and a different perspective, which thus develops the right mindset techniques, because you're simply always constantly thinking outside the box, and you're not necessarily just focused on the fires or the drama or the problems of the day ahead.
How do you, and this seems like a ridiculous question, but it's something that I'm very conscious of because I struggle with this sometimes as well. How do you systematize that so that you're forced to do it every single day, especially with the why element of this? Because I am seemingly pretty stupid in that I have a why one day and the next day I've forgotten about it. And then I go, oh, this is why I was doing all of it a week later when I'm reminded from a conversation or whatever it is. And I don't have a structure to put in place that allows me to go, every day I do this. This is why I'm doing it. And I write in a journal, which really helps me, but I don't use affirmations or anything like that. Is there anything you recommend, Daniel, to make this, if it's part of our morning routine, that we know our why, that we know what we're doing, that we have a structure with our learning and development so that it seamlessly happens, so it becomes a habit essentially?
Sure. Yeah. Great way to systemize your process of developing the right mindset and working towards success is you start with the end goal in mind, and then you reverse engineer it. So whether you want to be part of the 1%, earn $300,000 plus, you really have to identify and be very, very clear on what it is that you want, where you want to go, and then you reverse engineer it. And so where most salesmen, I think a lot of salesmen watching this are really going to relate with, is when we set our goals. We set our goals typically on the month-to-month basis. We live our lives through the month's goal. So this month I'm going to do X amount of sales, or this quarter I'm going to do X amount of sales. But not too many sales representatives actually breaks it down to a science or a systematic process. And so they'll say, I'm aiming for 10 sales, for example, for this month. And then once it gets about third way through the month, they'll reassess their end goal or the end result because there was no process in place. Mm-hmm. And so in order to systemize the process of reaching your full potential, you have to know exactly where you're going and work backwards from there. And then every single day, reinsert that goal, that you understand the daily actions that are necessary in order to reach X. And that X is your deeper reason why. That has to be heavily influenced by your deeper meaning, your deeper intent. So like I said, the example that we use for the person who wants to buy a boat, well, that he doesn't necessarily want to buy the boat. He wants to buy, the freedom, the sense of not only confidence and entitlement that comes with owning a boat, but it's also the bragging rights, right? Like, so he just wants to be accepted. That's his deeper layer why. And so if he knows that in order to be accepted, he needs to make $300,000 plus per year, he's really going to be motivated to make that $300,000 plus per year. Whereas if someone just wants to get a new car, they're limited, because once they get that new car, then what? Right? So I think that in order to create an efficient system, it comes down to starting with the end goal in mind and then working backwards and then breaking it down to a daily regimen, a daily schedule. So it does require discipline, because there are going to be times where you don't want to follow that schedule because it's going to be foreign to the things that you do every single day. You're always going to have an alternative to do or an alternative not to do. And that alternative not to do is always going to be there, right? Like, oh, I can get to it tomorrow, that procrastination voice. And so if you don't have a deep understanding of what your real intent is and understand what your why is, and you don't have an understanding of this, of the pieces and the actions that need to be taken every single day, not just for the entire month. I'm talking about every single day, to where you do those actions every day and you go into the next understanding that you're not bringing in any of the baggage nor the wins into the next day. You're going to be just fine. Because if you go into the next day and you had a successful day prior, you may ease off the throttle. So you want to be very cautious about that. And remember that every single morning, it starts from zero. Every single morning is a new opportunity. Every single morning is a new start. It's not living in the past or celebrating the past wins or sorrowing in the past drama. It's all about building and taking another step to move forward. So that's how you create a systematic process. You understand your why. You reverse engineer and understand the everyday actions that are needed to get yourself to that end result, and practice it every single day. And I think the morning ritual is just going to reinforce it so that you give yourself that chance to enjoy the process, because really the winning is in the process. So your habits are what bring you to that right mindset, or that 1%, whatever that point of success is to that individual.
I love it. I feel like this is a title for a book. Start from zero.
Yeah.
That's the, because this is you've just outlined the problem that I have. I'll have 14 days crushing it, doing whatever I'm doing, whether it's content, whether it's selling, advertising on the podcast, or selling the sales school, kind of B2B like we're doing now. And I have 14 days in, I go, well, I've hit my revenue targets. I'll just coast for the next kind of 2 or 3 days. And I'm the one setting my own frigging targets. I run the business. I don't have a sales manager like over my shoulder going, no, Will, just keep going. So I don't know if that's better or worse for me. It's probably worse for my personality. I probably need someone kind of shouting it down the phone at me to get me finger out and push forward with things. But that's exactly how I let myself down, perhaps. But the mindset of starting from zero erases that immediately, and it sets up the day for the day. Today's the battle. You know, the war will do what it's going to do. The marketplace is going to shift. The environment's going to shift. You know, I don't have kids, and so I've got a quiet place to work at the moment, and so I should probably double down on everything before kids and dogs and all that kind of stuff comes and adds another layer of complexity to things. So I should be grateful for that at the moment. But yeah, you can't necessarily control all of that, but you can control the day, right? You can control. I get up, I have a morning routine, I have a shower, I sit down, and that's, I guess that's the best way to leverage the start of things.
I think it's really about valuing your time too, because at the end of the day, whether it's a month or a quarter or a year from now, we're going to get there, and we're going to look back at our past actions, and we're going to be either in a point of regret or we're going to be in a point of celebration. And no matter what, you're headed there. Time's not going to stop for you. And if you value your time and you really hold yourself accountable, when you reach that quarter, when you reach the end of that year and you look back, if you genuinely want to be in a place where you're not going to regret lost time or regret a defeat, then you have to start every single day. You know, my team, we operate on a 2-point system per day. So every single day we're aimed and designed to score at least 2 points, which all throughout the day, I show them a scoreboard, and I'm on the scoreboard too, because I'm a producing manager as well. And so I put myself out there as well. And that's enabled me to be on their level as opposed to be their superior. And that builds this camaraderie that I think is very important. But the idea and the philosophy behind it is that every single day that scoreboard wipes down to 0. So whether you scored 3 points or 4 points the day before, that doesn't matter anymore. Right now, you're at 0. And the goal is to get at least 2 points on the board before you go home. And when you come back tomorrow, that board is going to be at 0. So it's just this constant cycle. And what has it done? It's made our team the number 1 team in the entire company. We've got over 100 sales teams. There's over 300 employees throughout the nationwide organization doing business in the billions. And it's that simple philosophy that starts from the front line that can ripple throughout the entire organization and influence all those around you. So if you want to be a better person, you want to be a better salesman, better entrepreneur, better, teacher, whatever it is, you really have to start with understanding your deeper layers of your why and what your intent is.
Love it. Well, with that, Daniel, I've got one final question, mate, to ask everyone that comes on the show. You've answered it in the past. I'm going to ask it you again, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
Wow, good question. So if I can look back in time over 20 years ago when I first started sales and give myself one piece of advice, I would say, don't take everything so personally. Put yourself out there and don't be afraid to mess up. Because if you're afraid to mess up, you're simply not going to grow. You're going to live your life and write your life with someone else's pen. And that's because you're too focused on other people's opinions and their views on you. And if you live in that way, you're not living for yourself. You're not living for your success. You're living for the acceptance by others. Accept yourself. Don't be afraid to fail, because the faster you fail, the faster you'll win. And when you do reach failure, make sure you look at it as stepping stones to success, because you'll only get better through failure.
Powerful stuff. Well, with that, Daniel, tell us about Sales Remastered, the YouTube channel, all the content, and then the training side of things as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. So, every Thursday from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I do a live stream at Sales Remastered, which is the name of the channel, on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And I share 30 minutes live with the sales community that follow my channel and talking about mindset development techniques, negotiation techniques, marketing, solicitations, inbound, outbound business, consumer sales. And the courses that I have at Sales Remastered, there's this one product that I have. It's this program. It's a 6-week training program that teaches you everything from marketing, process creation, mindset development, negotiation, as well as deliver direct mentoring, where the students already enrolled get to share an hour with me every other week, much like how we are. It's just us. And we focus on the problems that they're facing. A lot of these problems are very common. And so what I found be useful is inside this training course, I provided a module. It's called the Mentors Library, where I actually upload those mentoring sessions where a student can watch other mentoring sessions of other individuals who are facing the same challenges in case they didn't bring it up in our direct mentoring. But that's a program that's doing extremely well. With all the students that have already registered, they've used that program to climb to the top 10% of their organization. So not only has the investment paid for itself, but it's enabled them to experience the finer things in life that they were working so hard to get, but unfortunately they just simply didn't have the resources around them. They were kind of like maybe us, if you could relate, when we started in sales, we were kind of just given a phone book and fed to the wolves, yep. Right? No formal training, no real excellent script. And so what's unique about my course or my training content online is that it's coming from an actual salesman. I'm in the trenches with you today. I'm not telling you something that used to work when I was young. I'm telling you something that I'm using today that make my wins and make my sales today.
Good stuff. I appreciate that coming from the same perspective of still trying my best to sell whilst on the podcast. We have different problems of there's just too much inbound request for the ad space, which is why we're developing our own product so I can be on the phone. And I look forward to kind of continue these conversations as a salesperson to salesperson, because it does make a difference, and hopefully the audience, Sales Nation, appreciate that as well. And with that, Daniel, I'll link to everything that we talked about in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.red. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you so much, Will. It was great being on the show.